Hi, you're watching.
In the previous chapter, Andreas made the decision to choose the evolution trait. This led to an interesting interaction with the vampire, where he discovered that he could evolve other life forms besides his summon. Filled with confidence, he summoned Nickel, obtaining a skeleton subordinate. With this new addition, Andreas utilized his summon's capabilities to the fullest, allowing it to train him while he also worked on leveling up his trait. However, Andreas realized that his stamina was limited compared to the skeleton, which made him consider acquiring perks and potions to prolong his training. Unfortunately, he was broke and couldn't afford to buy them. Instead, he decided to make his own potion to save money. But his knowledge in potion making was lacking, so he thought attending class would help. Surprisingly, he found that his game knowledge surpassed what was being taught in class, leaving him disappointed. To add to his troubles, Andreas caught the attention of Lucia Everlast, one of the playable characters in the game. Despite his best efforts to push her away, Lucia proved to be resilient. In an unexpected turn of events, Lucia took the initiative and asked if he wanted to study with her. Now let's move on to the next part of the story. Seeing that Andreas was speechless, Lucia pressed him again, asking if he thought it was a good idea. Andreas realized that refusing might not be necessary, but he couldn't accept her proposal without knowing her true intentions. He was certain that there was an ulterior motive behind it, so he asked Lucia what she really wanted. Unexpectedly, Lucia responded that she simply wanted a research partner. She believed Andreas had a talent for creating amazing things and looked forward to the medicines he could brew that didn't yet exist in the world. This left Andreas speechless because he had never planned for this and was only trying to make medicine for himself. Now he found himself unexpectedly entangled with Lucia. However, the reason Lucia was so knowledgeable in potions wasn't just due to her talent. It was because she had a grave disease that even famous doctors and pharmacists couldn't cure. She had no choice but to study it herself. And this disease is a grave one that was granted by the system itself. But if someone wasn't like Andreas, who played the game a ton, that someone wouldn't be able to find the cure, because not even Andreas knows the exact ratio. However, meeting someone as intelligent as Lucia was the last thing he needed because it could reveal his true identity. It seemed like Lucia had heard what Andreas said in class and sought him out because of it. But Andreas knew that getting involved with her carelessly would only shorten his life, so he firmly told Lucia that he wasn't interested and that she should leave. Surprisingly, before she left, Lucia loudly mentioned the other ingredient that Andreas purposely didn't mention in class. This was the main material that nobody but him should know about. And what more surprising is that she just knew this intuitively. She then offered to help him and even mentioned the possibility of making money together. But Andreas wasn't willing to risk his life just because of her attractive proposal. He declined her offer once again, telling her that once she completed what she came to do, she could leave. Lucia agreed to give him some time to think about it, believing that he would change his mind soon enough. Andreas, however, had his doubts. A few moments later, Andreas was training inside his dorm with Nickel. While swinging his wooden sword, he couldn't help but deeply think about Lucia's proposal. However, he remained convinced that he made the right choice because the risks involved were too high, and he believed he could figure out the ratios himself. The real problem was the lack of money. Andreas pondered if there was any good idea that came to mind, but before he could think further, the sound of Nickel's sword interrupted his train of thought as if warning him to focus on training. Otherwise, he would beat his wood onto him, which terrified Andreas. But still, Andreas admired Nickel's ability to sense when he wasn't concentrating. He decided to shift his focus and avoid getting his ass whooped by Nickel's wood. After the training session ended, he would have more time to carefully think about his situation. A little while later, Andreas found himself walking down the streets. The only idea that came to mind was to ask his sister for money after she sent a letter expressing her missing him. However, he remembered that the previous Andreas had resorted to the same thing. He felt a sudden shame within him, knowing that begging for money was not the way to solve his problems, no matter how desperate he felt. Meanwhile, as Andreas walked alone, he caught the attention of a familiar lady that knew of him before. And looking at him closer, she was surprised to see Andreas carrying a book, as it was unexpected for him. She assumed he had finally mustered the determination to do something, but she remained convinced that his trashy personality couldn't be fixed. Unbeknownst to her, Andreas also noticed her presence and deliberately walked the other way to avoid her, because she was none other than Dean Alvin, the genius magician and young lady of the Alvin family, another character who could easily kill him in the academy. And it was disheartening, because they used to get along well as kids, but due to the Cromwell family's debt, they eventually grew apart. And the previous Andreas had done some pretty bad things since then, so he was certain that she would probably kill him just by talking to her. Either way, his death wouldn't be surprising, especially with one of the playable characters eyeing him. Given the circumstances, he thought that asking his younger sister for money was the best option right now. At a later time, Andreas arrived at the capital of Rodlin and made his way to where his younger sister was waiting for him. She warmly greeted him, and once they were alone, she asked him about the numerous letters she had sent, to which he hadn't responded. She wondered what had happened, but Andreas knew that the previous Andreas had simply ignored them. He apologized and expressed his regret for making her work despite being a lady of a count's household. This surprised her because it wasn't like him to say something like that. She reassured him that it wasn't his fault and asked him not to be so hard on himself. Her genuine concern for him, even after he had taken advantage of her kindness, made Andreas feel pathetic and powerless. In an attempt to lighten the mood, Amy jokingly asked if he needed more money again. However, she had already considered it as a possibility and prepared some for him. She reminded him not to spend it carelessly, and Andreas was grateful. He promised her that he would definitely pay her back. As he raised his arms, Amy noticed something missing, the ring. She questioned Andreas about its whereabouts, catching him off guard. He quickly made up an excuse, claiming that he had taken it off so he wouldn't lose it. But Amy wasn't convinced. Her shocked expression revealed that the ring held significant meaning to her. Feeling the weight of his lies, Andreas could only apologize once again, unsure of what to do. Unexpectedly, Amy stood up and told him to leave, stating that she didn't want to see him anymore. Andreas was taken aback by her words and tried to explain himself, but Amy ran away, commanding him never to come back and that he doesn't have to pay her back anymore. With this, their sibling relationship was severed, and Andreas realized just how important the ring he had sold must have been to her. It was the first time he had seen Amy so angry, and he felt miserable inside. With this, he set a new goal, to retrieve the ring as soon as possible. Merely existing without purpose held no meaning in life, and he hadn't been happy surviving alone before. He was determined to make the most of what he had. And with that in mind, he decided to accept Lucia's proposal. A few days had passed, and Andreas and Lucia had already begun their potion manufacturing experiments. While Andreas worked himself to the bone, Lucia seemed to be lazing around today. It often infuriated Andreas because he felt like he was the only one putting in the effort while she relaxed. However, there were times when Lucia switched gears and helped speed things up. Whenever Andreas hit a wall, she would wake up from her slumber and guide him with precise intuition, even getting right to the heart of the problem. Andreas couldn't help but admire this about her. Nonetheless, he was only doing this for the money, and working together with Lucia seemed to be the best answer. With a few more adjustments, the potion Andreas was brewing finally started to mix, and instead of exploding, it transformed into a bright and colorful liquid. Then a system window appeared in front of Andreas, informing him that he had successfully manufactured an intermediate-grade physical reinforcement potion. Excitement welled up within him, and he stood up from his chair, accidentally waking up Lucia in the process. A smile spread across Andreas' face as it had finally worked. The potion experiment was now complete. Surprisingly, another system window popped up, notifying him of a talent that he just received, a potion brewing ability, and it can be evolved. And the probability for evolving it was 32%. With this, Andreas realized that he could now evolve traits, meaning he could essentially evolve anything if the conditions were met. However, the 32% probability was lower than when he evolved the vampire, so he decided to save it for now. Meanwhile, Lucia was ecstatic about the incredible potion they had just brewed, which seemed to have virtually no side effects and could be used daily. She eagerly wanted to make a request to the potion examination committee right away. Andreas, however, chose not to accompany her, believing that she could handle this part since he had done most of the work so far. In response, Lucia assured him that she would take care of it happily, even if the midterm exams were starting tomorrow. Observing her energetic attitude, Andreas realized that she had been intentionally slacking off. Meanwhile, deep inside the underground dungeon, Angela Lucifer lay on the floor while thinking about Andreas, the person responsible for her current state. And it seems like she was still in the process of evolving, with roughly 15 days remaining before it would be completed. However, Angela couldn't see the system window, so she wondered what Andreas had done to her. And her entire body burned with pain, yet she sensed that there was something more to this agony. Despite it all, she eagerly anticipated the evolution's conclusion. On the next day, it was time for the midterm evaluations. All the students of the academy boarded the train to reach the evaluation spot. During the journey, Andreas took the opportunity to read a book and expand his knowledge. He could relax without worrying about Lucia because he knew she could easily pass the first examination. Once the first examination was over, there would be the magic tower where the final part would take place. Andreas had been training diligently, resulting in considerable improvement in his swordsmanship and necromancy. As long as he managed to pass the midterms, everything would be fine. Furthermore, the vampire's evolution was almost complete, so he planned to check on her afterward. He believed that if he provided an excuse upon his return, it would probably be acceptable for him to visit her. Meanwhile, as Andreas went about his business, the girl in front of him struck up a conversation with Dean, who was seated beside her. She asked Dean what she thought the midterms would be like this time, considering that the groups and requests would be randomized. The girl expressed her hope that if she got lucky, it would be a breeze. Dean replied that it shouldn't matter whom she was paired with, but the blonde girl had a different opinion. She believed it wouldn't be that simple because it would be difficult for her if she ended up in the same group as Andreas. But upon closer inspection, Andreas is looking like an absolute stud right now as his muscle could barely contain his shirt, which instantly surprised Diana as she didn't expect that Andreas was hiding such bread under his cloak this entire time. Soon after, the staff alerted them that they had only 1 minute left until their arrival at Auckland Training Station. As the train came to a stop, the professor instructed them to disembark, and they eagerly followed his command. Now gathered together, the professor explained the process for the upcoming midterm exams. As previously mentioned, the exams would be conducted in groups consisting of random members. Each group would consist of 3 students from the Warrior Department, 1 student from the Magic Department, and a supervisor. The groups would have until Monday to complete their assigned tasks. With the instructions delivered, the professor wished everyone participating good luck and proceeded to announce the groups. A few moments later, Andreas couldn't help but curse at his unfortunate situation. In this academy filled with countless villains, he ended up in a group with not 1 but 2 of them. The first is a player who fought the cult fanatic Hazard Gapri, and the other is the Academy's indiscriminating murderer, Vivian the Lunatic. It seemed like his luck was truly that of a trashy characters. As he was lost in his thoughts, someone suddenly called out to him, and he turned to see a blue-haired guy introducing himself as Christopher, a member of the same group as Andreas. Christopher looked at Andreas with disgust, not because of his family background, but because Andreas seemed to be training like a warrior instead of embracing his role as a magician. Disgusted, Christopher approached Andreas to warn him not to get in his way. Andreas, not wanting to attract any unnecessary attention, decided to let it slide. Fortunately, their hostile atmosphere was disrupted by another member of their ill-fated group, who introduced himself in a whimsical manner, trying to diffuse the tension with a friendly smile. Meanwhile, Vivian, with her cold expression, introduced herself, further adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Now, with the 3 villains gathered, Andreas couldn't shake off the unease within him. To make matters worse, their group also had a supervisor who resembled a mob-like knight. It was safe to say that this was the worst group ever assembled. Andreas could only watch helplessly as these unfortunate characters clashed with each other due to their mismatched lineup. As the professor observed that everyone had met their respective groups, he informed them that they should now collect the specific requests assigned to them. He reminded them to do their best to come back alive. However, considering Andreas' group, he couldn't help but have grave doubts about their chances of survival. A few moments later, Andreas and his group were aboard the train, heading towards their mission destination. As they sat idle, their supervisor, Ivy Claire, took the opportunity to formally introduce herself as the supervisor of Group 9. With that out of the way, she proceeded to show them the task their group had been assigned. Upon closer examination, it appeared that they were required to investigate a village in Baron Ballaric's territory. Rumor had it that the landlord of the village of Thrim had been murdered, and even a mercenary investigator sent 2 weeks ago had gone missing. The urgency of the situation demanded an immediate investigation. After reading the details, Ivy asked if there were any questions. However, her demeanor made it clear that she didn't want to be bothered, as if silently saying, "Try me, motherfucker." So without further inquiries, the group refrained from asking anything. Andreas couldn't help but notice that Ivy seemed much more aggressive than her game counterpart. Beyond her becoming the youngest Aura Master in the near future, not much else was known about her character. Her skills were real, but Andreas feared that her personality could make things difficult. Just as he was pondering this, Ivy decided to pick on him as well, having overheard that he had been playing as a knight recently. It seemed that every knight took it as an insult, leading Ivy to doubt Andrea's abilities. Assuming that as a mage he couldn't even lift, Ivy made her assumptions known. However, Andreas had grown tired of others underestimating him, and so he retaliated with cunning remarks, reminding her that he didn't want to hear such comments from someone who needed to chew on jerky to keep her cool. With this, the tension in the air escalated briefly, but fortunately, nothing further transpired. Finally, the group arrived at their destination, ready to embark on their investigation. But as they laid their eyes upon the place, they couldn't help but be taken aback. A castle of such grandeur was not what they expected from a mere baron. Nevertheless, they had a job to do, so they entered the castle and met with Baron Ballaric, who willingly provided a brief explanation of the situation. Once the Baron had finished his yapping, Ivy thanked him for the details, and before they could delve deeper into the matter, the butler interrupted, informing the Baron of urgent matters. Andreas, ever the skeptic, observed them closely and, as anticipated, the Baron promptly excused himself, claiming he had to attend to something important. With the Baron's departure, the butler apologized for their apparent rudeness and abruptly leaving. They explained that the young master of the Baron was unwell, leaving them no choice but to attend to his needs. Ivy, understanding the situation, reassured the butler that it was perfectly fine as they had already gathered all the necessary information. They conveyed that they would be leaving soon, assuring the butler that they wouldn't cause any further inconvenience. And with that, they departed from the castle, though Andreas couldn't shake off his lingering suspicion towards them. After returning from their carriage, Ivy expressed her gratitude to Christopher for a job well done in watching over the equipment. With that taken care of, the group gathered outside the castle before their departure. Ivy took the opportunity to engage in a conversation with Andreas, sharing her observations about the Baron's demeanor. She couldn't help but notice the Baron's unusual calmness despite his nephew being missing. Ivy wondered if that was the reason Andreas insisted on leaving immediately. Andreas confirmed her suspicions, pointing out several factors that seemed suspicious. The fabricated story about the missing investigators who lost contact, the lack of follow-up investigations despite a whole month passing, and the peculiar attitude of the suspicious butler were all red flags. It was evident that the butler was not pleased with their decision to leave right away. He had even tried to suggest they rest up and leave the next day, but they declined his offer. The butler's disappointment was unmistakable. Above all, their anxiety was palpable. Their trembling, labored breathing, and behavior hinted at someone hiding something significant. With their suspicions heightened, they knew there was more to this mission than meets the eye. They unanimously decided to head straight to Thrym Village without delay, as they were certain that uncovering the truth awaited them. And with that, they set off on their journey.
Hit that like button and thanks for watching.